How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. Yesterday, as of us recording this, the Boston Celtics won the NBA Finals. They won championship number 18, taking back the lead against the LA Lakers for most championships in franchise history in the NBA. They beat the Dallas Mavericks in a 7-game series 4-1. And they looked dominant doing it. This has been a team, a core that has been together for a while, mostly a homegrown core. The Celtics, drafted Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum 7 years ago, respectively, and have brought them up. They had their first little taste of the finals back in 2022. But lost to a very, very hot Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. But they're finally champions. Boston is a city of champions once again. And obviously we have to start by tipping our caps, giving our congratulations to the Celtics for what they did. Nick, how did you feel watching the series, watching Game 5 last night, seeing the coronation and everything? What are sort of your thoughts there?
Man, Game 5, I just catching parts of it, man. Such a blowout. And in quarter 2, just the separation that the Celtics were able to do, just pulling away from the Mavs is just you could just tell watching these two teams that one of these teams had 5 top 50 players on them, and one of them was the Mavericks. And there's not so much that you can do if you're the Mavericks and just be like, okay, the plan is Luka and Kyrie to score 70 combined points, and that's how we're going to win. You can't rely on that, especially on a team with just, I would say, a historically great backcourt and wings of just defensive players. Not necessarily the most talented overall wings, but I just think that the defensive players that the Celtics were able to throw at Luka and Kyrie were tremendous and swung the series.
Yeah, I mean, Luka and Kyrie, especially in games 1 and 2 and 3 or in 5, they just looked like they couldn't do anything. I mean, Jaylen Brown is picking up Luka Doncic 94 feet from the basket, and the minute that they crossed half court, they tried to run their pick and rolls that worked really good in Game 4 to get some of those lobs to Gafford and Washington, and it just wasn't working. Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, they would not let it happen. And the few times that the Mavs were able to run a set to get an open look, they weren't hitting shots. I can count probably like 5 or 6 3-pointers that Kyrie Irving had that were good looks that he just wasn't converting on. Luka Doncic, made a few threes there at the end, but for the most of the game just couldn't hit the broadside of the barn with a 3-point attempt. So the Celtics just looked dominant, and they looked dominant all season. They were the best team in the league all season. And as fun as an underdog story is and a Cinderella run, it's also nice when the team that is played the best all year and is the most deserving really gets that win. Nick, I'm thinking about this team. I mean, it's hard to look at this team and not think about the big acquisitions and big moves that brought these guys together. I mean, I think particularly about Drew Holiday. I think he was the missing piece and was the catalyst that actually brought this team to, brought them their banner. The Porzingis trade was a big one, but what are some of your thoughts about the guys that Brad Stevens, once Brad Stevens took over as the GM, and for those of you that don't know, he took over 3 years ago, was the head coach, became the general manager, and since he has been on a historic run as general manager. So Nick, what are some of your thoughts about some of these acquisitions, some of the things that he's done to put this team together?
Man, Brad Stevens, just masterful job GMing, and so many people have lamented Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown over the last couple of years that they just weren't a talented enough duo to win, and especially last year against the Heat in the playoffs. And when they played against the Warriors in the finals, just to see them as a duo get outplayed by Steph Curry and Andrew Wiggins or by Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo people were just lamenting them as a duo, as the top players on their team that they were. And just that normally with teams, you'll see the two best players on the team and say, we need to put everything on you, and we'll put pieces around you that can complement you, but that you guys are the ones with the pressure on your shoulders. And with this Celtics team, Brad Stevens really just said, the pressure doesn't have to be on your shoulders. Derek White, we're going to trade for you from San Antonio. We're going to develop you. Porzingis, we have Robert Williams, but we need somebody who has that rim defense and is a shooter. Drew Holiday, we have Marcus Smart, but we're just going to get a better upgrade in basically every way with Drew Holiday. Having somebody who can shoot 40% from three in this playoffs and guard the best opponent's offensive player, that's Marcus Smart was a defensive player of the year a couple of years ago. And Drew Holiday soundly has outplayed him on defense the last couple of years. And so just to Brad Stevens to just say, what we have is really good, but we're just going to get the most talent in the whole league and have a starting five that legitimately can beat any team in the league on any given night easily. That's just wicked impressive by Brad Stevens, and something that we haven't seen for many, many years, a collective team like that.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. This team is just so well-rounded. I know that coming into these finals, a lot of people were talking about, if you put all of the players together and had to rank them, who is the best. Some people are saying, you've got Luka and Kyrie at 1 and 2 because they were having a great playoffs going into that, especially coming off that Western Conference Finals win. But then it was like the Celtics have the next 6, maybe 7 guys there. And it's true. Brad Stevens just did such a great job acquiring not just guys, but picks too. In the deal that got them Kristaps Porzingis, they also got 2 first-round picks. They got what turned out to be, and maybe at the time it wasn't that clear, but what turned out to be the better player for their team in Kristaps Porzingis for Marcus Smart, and also walked away with 2 first-round picks. I also commend Brad Stevens. He did a good job getting rid of, maybe I don't think there was anybody on the team over the last 2 years that I would call locker room cancers, like nothing that bad, but the bigger personalities that sometimes were making it more about me and less about we, by getting rid of Marcus Smart and Grant Williams, getting a lot for Grant Williams, a player that, if you ask me, was not worth what they got for him. When that happened. Grant Williams, a player that got traded originally to the Mavs, and the Mavs then shipped off to Charlotte to get PJ Washington. So sort of the Grant Williams bowl of finals here. But yeah, and the other thing is he's locked these guys down. It's not just trading for a loner guy who's going to be around for 1 year. They traded for Drew Holiday and then signed him to a 4-year extension. He's locked up for them through 26-27 with a player option for 27-28. Porzingis, they have locked up through 25-26, so they get 2 more years of him. Tatum, they're about to ink down probably the highest paid deal in NBA history here in the next week or so. I'd be surprised if they don't. Jaylen Brown, they signed. The biggest thing, man, him keeping Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum together is when everyone thought they can't play together, they can't win together. I would imagine, I saw Mike Greenberg said this today, and I think he's right, that I would imagine that earlier on they couldn't play together and win together, that they had some ego stuff that they had to work through. And I imagine after that 22 finals loss to the Warriors, they really got together and they really realized, like, listen, we need to do this. And you saw it when Jaylen Brown accepted his finals MVP trophy and said, listen, this isn't just me. This is me and my brother, Jason Tatum, my partner in crime. We as a team wouldn't be here without him. So yeah, I mean, Brad Stevens has just done a great job. The only piece of their team here that is super worth mentioning, that had played meaningful minutes here in the NBA Finals, that they might technically not have next year is Sam Hauser, who they have a team option for and will likely just pick him up at a discounted rate. So, I mean, he's done a good job, not just bringing in the right guys, getting rid of the wrong guys, but bringing in the guys and setting them up for success for the future, not just for 1 year like you see a lot of teams do when they trade for these loaner guys.
Definitely. And part of what make this Celtics team so good is their ability to play 5-out ball. And where I'd be worried about the Celtics going forward would be that Al Horford potentially retiring or Kristaps Porzingis with his health. And so I'm just curious if that becomes a factor to, obviously, what people are thinking about now with the Celtics is, are they going to repeat? Are they going to be able to go back to back? And I just feel like that 5 position is what would really worry me in terms of, like, if Horford retires, then you're depending on, like, hey, we need to re-sign Xavier Tillman to go with Kristaps Porzingis. But Porzingis obviously has been a very large health risk his whole career.
Right. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is that they do still have a first-round pick this year. They will be picking – the last pick of the first round will be them in about a week or so. So they will still have the opportunity to, let some of those end of the bench guys go, get some other ones or someone else at a discounted rate on draft night. I know this is comparatively a weaker draft class than most, but that doesn't mean that there isn't talent there. I mean, heck, Nikola Jokic got picked during a Taco Bell commercial and is now a 3-time MVP. So there's always diamonds in the rough there if you can develop them, and the Celtics have shown that they are able to develop players, not just the ones they draft and are completely homegrown. But you talked about Derek White, and I think that's a great example. He came from the San Antonio Spurs organization, an organization known for their class and their professionalism. Greg Popovich does such a good job developing players. Kawhi Leonard is the player that he is today because of Pop. And others too. And so for them to get Derek White and be like, you know what, we can take you and we can put you on another level than what you are. I think you could make an argument that Derek White is the third best player on this team, a team with Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, because not just of his offensive ability, man, like when he gets going, he cannot miss from deep. But also he plays great defense too. I mean, they talked about, he had an insane block on a dunk last night that they talked about. He doesn't care if he's on ESPN because he got dunked on. He's willing to go up and try and block that shot. And he takes that next step, that extra edge that a lot of players aren't willing to take in his position. So I think that the Celtics, I don't want to go so far as to say that, they're a lock to repeat just because of how hard that is to do in the modern NBA. I think the same things we were saying about the Celtics right now, we were saying about Denver last year, and they lost in the second round to an up-and-coming Minnesota team. So I think it's just too hard to win championships in the NBA nowadays to be like, yeah, they're going to repeat. But at the same time, they are set up for success, to say the least.
Right.
So we talked about the Celtics. We've given them their time, but we have to talk about the Dallas Mavericks because the Mavericks had an unexpected run to get here to the NBA Finals. They played great basketball this year. After the trade deadline, the Mavs are sort of a tale of two halves of the season. The Dallas Mavericks, before acquiring PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, and post acquiring PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, are two completely different teams. Credit to them and to the organization for when they were just sort of teetering around, like, might sneak into the playoffs as the 6, not maybe just avoid the play-in, for being willing to say, you know what, we are going to go make moves. We're not going to take our foot off the gas like they did the year before, and went and bolstered their roster by making those moves. But fell short here, and were to my suggestion, I would say that they were just a little early in where their biggest potential is moving forward. So Nick, what did you see from the Mavs that you liked? What was something that, yes, they had a really disappointing finals, but what was something that you saw that was like that's the thing that they can hang their hat on and use that as a building block moving forward?
Honestly, part of what I saw from the Mavs that was really, really intriguing to me was just really good GMing, just like what we're talking about with the Celtics, where it seems like I can't name a trade or acquisition or something like that the last couple of years that the Celtics have done that's worked out poorly. With this Mavs team, just in this last offseason, getting Derek White on the minimum, drafting Derek Lively at pick 12 and getting him as just a steal at pick 12 at the time, and then getting PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. Those are tremendous value acquisitions when they got them at the trade deadline. Where 4 acquisitions like that and having them all work out to contribute to a team that makes it to the finals, that's just very impressive from a team building aspect, I would say, for me. Because Grant Williams, who they signed last offseason, or who they signed and traded, I believe, they said, okay, this isn't working, and immediately turned that around to get Gafford from Charlotte.
Yep.
And I just think that's very competent management. That's
Yeah.
something that I think is foundational to every great team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they similar to what Brad Stevens did in Boston with, signing Grant Williams, realizing, for a longer contract, realizing this isn't working out, need to ship him off. Same with Marcus Smart, making those tough decisions and being humble in that instead of, being too proud to realize, listen, I made a mistake and we need to move on. They were willing to get rid of Garrett or of Grant Williams there, excuse me. And yeah, like you said, Derek Jones Jr. getting him on the league minimum for this year was a great move for them. They did only sign him for 1 year, so he is a free agent this year, and I'm sure there are going to be teams calling because of the player that he has sort of become here this year for this Mavs team. I mean, he was a starter in the NBA Finals for this Dallas Mavericks team, so they need to. I feel like they need to find a way to lock him up. He and Markieff Morris are the only guys on this roster right now that they don't have signed further than this year. But Derek Jones Jr. in particular is a really, really big piece that they're going to need to make sure that they have locked in, whether it's him or whether it's finding somebody else. And they don't have a lot of cap space. They're in the negative in their cap space right now, and they don't have many picks. Their pick that they have this year is a second-round pick, and it belongs to Boston. So it is the last pick in the draft is the pick that they have this year. So Nick, what are maybe you thinking about ways that they can try to bolster this roster a little bit moving forward, or is it sort of we'll just need to wait and see because they don't have much wiggle room? And what are you thinking?
Dallas, I think, is in a really good spot, I think, as a team. But to be a really good spot in a team doesn't mean you're going to make it to the NBA Finals next year or the year after that. I think to be in a really good spot, the moment they drafted Luka Doncic and the moment they got Kyrie Irving and he had his head on straight, I think that gives you a great foundation for a team in a way. But as a great podcaster and basketball analyst, Jason Timpf, who I've watched for a good while now, he described it as basically when you have superstars, it's able to provide a lot of wiggle room for the other players you have on the team, carving out way easier roles for them. We're currently on this team, you have Luka, you have Kyrie, who are your superstars. But besides those superstars, all you really need is athleticism and defense and a little play finishing, I would say. Where realistically, what they currently have on the team is a couple of players who play some good defense in Lively and Gafford and Washington. And they've really done a tremendous job as play finishers and athletes, where PJ Washington, the hot streak he was on from 3 this postseason, and their ability on these lobs to finish these plays, these lobs that are just perfect passes from Luka and Kyrie, able to convert those into points. And I just think that Dallas is in a spot where it feels like there are more ancillary moves to make, where it's not necessarily big swings. Like, I don't think they need a Paul George, but I feel like they do need to get like a KCP, like a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a two-way, somebody who can take a little bit of the burden, but these quality, I would say, role players on the team. Somebody like a Derek White, who you get him and he's a solid role player, but you develop him into a great role player, where somebody like that who can be a connective piece, a two-way player. And so I think that that's probably what the Mavericks need to be looking for, a two-way player, somebody who can play off the ball, considering Luka and Kyrie already are very ball-dominant players. And so that's where I would say the Mavs are at right now. What would you say they'd be looking for necessarily and how they're moving forward?
Well, I don't. So something that literally just occurred to me as you were just talking is that they're going to have a full off season with Gafford and Washington on the team, and they're going to have a full training camp and preseason with those guys, where Jason Kidd can figure out what will work best for them. What the Celtics did in the finals was they were like, we're not going to let you use the pick and roll to get those lobs. And Dallas's offensive efficiency was like 20 or 30 points lower than what it had been all year. And it's like, what the heck happened? You know, that was the one thing that, you know, they were like, we can always lean on this. And because Boston took it away, they were really, really stuck. Now, I do think that Gafford and Washington are good enough players and big enough pieces that now that Jason Kidd will have a full offseason to work with them, work with the team, they'll be able to figure out other ways, more unique ways to use them, which I think will be really, really big. I do think that they need to find a way to lock up Derek Jones Jr. If they can, or some sort of equivalent, because of how important of a piece that was, being a strong defender, decent shooter when he has those looks, really good from the corner, and also a cutter, a slasher that's able to get inside and willing to get inside and do some of that dirty work. So if that is re-signing Derek Jones Jr. for them, then great. If that is letting him go and finding somebody else that they can sign at the minimum that they see the same potential in, that's great too. They don't have, you know, we talked about how they only have a second round pick this year, but they do have their first round picks, their own first round picks for 25 and 26. So they do have some trade assets on top of some of the guys on their roster. I feel bad because Tim Hardaway Jr. is just like the guy that just seems to get thrown into every single trade that happens. I feel like if you looked at his basketball reference page, he's technically been on the roster of like 8 teams, right? But he is a guy that has talent, and some team might be looking for that they didn't really use. And maybe they didn't use him because that was poor coaching by Jason Kidd. And maybe they didn't use him because they looked around and they were like, you know what? We've got guys like Derek Jones Jr. and Josh Green, who had a great game 5 last night, who do basically what Tim Hardaway Jr. does and are a little cheaper. So maybe they can use him as a trade piece here and there. We'll see what they happen. But Nick, you did talk. And we talked a little bit about Luka and Kyrie, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how disappointing they were in the finals. Kyrie in particular. Luka, I think if you looked at his stats, you wouldn't think that he was very disappointing, but I think there's a lot of other stuff that has been kind of talked about ad nauseum at this point, but is worth mentioning as to ways that he was disappointing. So, Nick, what do you think it is? What is going to get Kyrie over the hump with the Celtics? What's going to get him, past this mental block that it almost seems like he has playing against Boston?
I I completely agree with you as well, Jack, that it seems like there's that mental block that during games 1 and 2, especially, he just seemed really rattled. With the crowd booing him every single moment that he had the ball, it just felt like he
Yeah,
just wasn't mentally in the right space. And Kyrie, I I'm hesitant to call him a streaky player because he's a very efficient scorer, and I wouldn't call him a very streaky scorer. But as I'm sure you've noticed, like when you watch Kyrie, if he's in one of those modes, if he's in one of those headspaces where he hits 2 or 3 shots in a row, he basically becomes unguardable the whole rest of the game. Where like he hits a couple
absolutely.
of, and he doesn't even need to take these heat check shots because most of the shots he takes are really tough shots in the first place. And especially when he gets downhill into the lane and can take his jumpers, I just feel like he gets in a zone where nobody can guard him. But I just don't know if that's possible against Boston in that hostile environment. I think that
Right.
maybe the answer is like to get over this mental blockage, just win as many games as you can and get a higher seed or higher position than the Celtics and just like play more games at home. Play more games at home
Right.
than on the road against Boston, because if you're playing 4 games in Dallas rather than 4 games in Boston, 4 good Kyrie games, and if Luka's going those games, that can win you a championship. And
Yeah.
so I just feel like do what you can to try and get in that headspace. But realistically, I feel like what the Mavericks can do is actually more about the young guys developing than Kyrie. I don't think Kyrie at this point in his career is an upward trajectory player. After the
Mm.
second round, after the second round, I believe he was the oldest like starter in the whole playoffs besides Al Horford. Al Horford was off the bench during that, or depending on when Porzingis got hurt. But he was
Right.
basically the oldest contributor slash star left in the playoffs in round 2, just because with
Sure.
LeBron and KD, Steph out. And so for Kyrie to be the oldest, it feels like, 32. He's like not that old. But Kyrie, I just don't think's on that upward trajectory. And I think actually what could help Dallas a lot is development of their bigs between Gafford and Lively. Because what we saw a bunch in this series particular was Tatum guarding Lively or guarding Gafford, guarding the big, allowing Porzingis during the early games or Horford to roam and kind of be that shot blocker. And during game 1 or 2, I believe, they were able to punish Tatum for guarding their big, and Gafford and Lively were doing some good things. But if they're
Hmm.
able to beat if Lively or Gafford are able to beat players off the dribble a little bit in the post, I think that could go a really long way in terms of generating quality offense when teams are trying to punish you by doing that. And that was something that you could just see those lobs, as we were talking about, just get taken away when they're moving their bigs and Tatum around in order to guard your guys.
Yeah. Yeah. The Mavs just like we already talked about, really struggled with finding other options when they're you know typical, this is our guaranteed thing to work, wasn't working. Speaking of their guaranteed thing that works wasn't working, I think I think Luka Doncic got a lot of scrutiny early on in this series, especially after Game 3, the way Game 3 ended, and I think a lot of it was a little too much. But I do think that the scrutiny itself, or the reasons that he was being scrutinized, was fair. And I think it's fair to look at him and say, when you're doing what you're doing, you are the baddest man on offense on the planet, without a doubt. You can get your looks, you can get your shot, and get your points, get your buckets, get to the free throw line better than you know better than like James Harden during his MVP, or almost, right. Like he can get in that flow state and can just do it. But
Mhm.
his defense, man, it became a problem. It became a problem, and I think a lot of people were saying, and I thought this was spot on. Jay Williams was saying it is, and CJ McCollum is, you don't need to be a first team all defense player, but if you can just get to a point that you are a serviceable defensive player. I mean, look at Jason Tatum, for example. He didn't play great defense in the finals this year, especially when he was covering Luka Doncic. Luka was getting his points, getting his buckets when Tatum was covering him. But you know what? Tatum was being serviceable enough that it was making it hard for Luka, and Luka was getting tired and worn out.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, Jaylen Brown was never getting tired during this NBA Finals run for them. Jason Tatum, when he was being guarded by Luka, never getting tired. Drew Holiday, Derek White, it just kept being really, really easy for them. And so I think Luka definitely needs to step up his defense. But the thing that I want to touch on most and talk about most here, and want to hear your thoughts on, is what you could call his antics, for example, right? The way he's talking to the refs, stuff like that. The way he gets in trouble, the way he commits these really, really dumb fouls when he's upset. And to his credit, unlike maybe some of the guys that were wearing green last night, he doesn't complain after he commits what's an egregious foul and obviously a foul as much as maybe some of them do. But when he complains, it's like, it's almost full thrown temper tantrum. So, like, Nick, what are you hoping to see going into next season from Luka in terms of his on-court demeanor?
Man, I heard it posed best in terms of when you get Luka angry about a call is much better than when you get him upset or like really disempowered about a call. When Luka feels like he's wronged and he's zoned in with that anger and really can attack the rim and get to his spots, getting to the basket, you see a zoned in Luka Doncic when there are bad calls. But when Luka just like the shoulders slump and he just like jogs back, complains about a call, you see a Luka that on offense and defense can just deteriorate very quickly. And so I would just say that maybe with Luka, it's more of a headspace thing of, if you feel like you're not getting the call, be upset about it. Maybe don't be pouty about it, but I don't know that it's much more than that. His defense is never going to be great, but like bad calls are going to happen. You got to get back in transition though, bud. Get back in transition. Help your team. Stay engaged. Superstars gotta stay engaged, especially ball dominant ones. We don't want to see a James Harden type moment out of Luka of just people blowing by him anymore. We don't want to. I'm sure you saw the stat after the first 3 games of this series of the blow by percentage. Did you see the blow by percentage stat of on 66% of the drives against him? It was something like that he was blown by.
It was something bad.
It was ridiculous. And so Luka, like you just got to be in the right headspace, keep your eyes up, keep your head up, and stay engaged. That's all I ask from you. You don't have to be good, but just like put in that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I think was the most frustrating to me, especially watching Game 3 with him, was obviously, and I think we sort of need to like start at the end and work back to the beginning. So foul number 6, where he fouled out with 4 minutes left. And that might be one of the biggest what ifs in recent NBA history, is if he doesn't foul out, what happens? If Dallas wins that game, then instead of the Celtics taking a 3-2 lead, or instead of the Celtics winning the series last night, they take a 3-2 lead and they're going back to Dallas for Game 6 this weekend, right? And that is that is a lot different of a space that we're at. So foul number 6 happens, and he throws a huge, huge fit. Now, that was a foul. That was clearly a foul. Moving backwards, foul number 5 was questionable. I don't think that was – I thought that was a charge. I didn't think it was a block. I think the reason that Luka was so upset after foul number 6 and was yelling at his bench, smacking the floor, was because they didn't challenge the call on foul number 5, and he wanted that. But when you move back to the beginning of the game, his first 2 fouls were the guy he was guarding blew by him, and he just sort of grabbed around his back to commit a foul to keep it from being an easy dunk. His first foul last night in Game 5 was the same way, and I was like, oh, here we go again. If Luka fouls out, I'm going to be thinking about this, right? And that actually goes back to his defensive aggression and his defense of just being serviceable, being low in a defensive stance. He's there. I feel like so many times he's playing defense and he's just standing upright, or he's like leaning over with his hands on his knees because he's dog tired. And so I think we need to see some conditioning. I think that this summer, when he's working out with the team and working out privately with individuals and coaches, it needs to be like, listen, we will shoot shots because you always need to keep your shot fresh, but we need to work on like even going back to the basics of like your defensive slides, right? Like stuff that's like feels so basic, but just like, hey, if when you see the guy going to your right, you can get over that fast, it's already, exponentially better. And that blow by percentage, gets cut in half. So I think there's a lot of growth here. I do not think that Luka is never going to make it back to the finals. I think we'll see him definitely win a championship. I think I am not 100% sure that he's going to be a lifelong Maverick. I think that that's a discussion for another day. But I do think that Luka will have his time, and like the greats like Kobe, like Michael, like LeBron, when they finally got that championship, talked like bittersweet about the losses that helped shape them, so they were prepared for when the next time came. I think Luka's gonna be able to do that.
Right.
So,
yes, go for it.
No, go ahead.
Something that was a stark part of this series that I think is kind of underappreciated about Jason Tatum, and that was a huge problem with Luka, was that obviously for most of the series, Tatum's shot was very off. It was a very bad shooting percentage from 2 and 3 from him the whole series. But the thing is, early on, especially in the series, you still saw his defense being solid, his rebounding be good, and his assist numbers stay good, where he did a solid job facilitating in the game. And being able to be a multifaceted player like that when your shot's off, I think that Luka has some of that, where he has the size to be able to rebound. He definitely can facilitate the ball, even though he's more heliocentric. But the thing is, like, the rebounding to me is actually a huge deal, where there are clips floating around from some of these games of Luka just not boxing out and Derek White getting an easy offensive rebound, where Jason Tatum's tough rebounding defensively and offensively made a huge difference. And I think Luka just didn't do those little things very well. And so I feel like Luka, his shooting percentages weren't great either. He shot like 25% from 3 in this series. But the thing is, like, when you're doing something bad, do something else, put in some effort into something else to try and be able to counteract that bad shooting. I just don't know that Luka had the energy for that, though, in all honesty. The cardio, the shape that he's in, I just don't know that he had that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember just even last night multiple times that, it was maybe the third or fourth time down the floor that a shot didn't go down, or that maybe he thought he was open and should have gotten an extra pass or an open look, and someone else took the shot instead or whatever, where they missed again, and the Celtics get the rebound and they're starting to push down, and not even like push, like fast break, but just bring the ball back down the floor, and you see his head just kind of like drop and him turn and just like slowly jog. And I think you're absolutely right. The momentum that comes from the offense to affect the defense, Tatum was like, I don't need momentum from my offense to affect my defense, because I'm here to play and I'm here to do whatever it takes. And I think we'll see a Luka Doncic in the near future that is different than that, because I feel like I remember seeing that from Tatum and Brown earlier in their careers as well. This is their second finals, but I think it's their third or maybe even fourth Eastern Conference Finals. Actually, fifth or sixth Eastern Conference Finals that they've played in together, this year, dating back to 2018 when they faced LeBron and the Cavs. So I think again, Luka, this will be a hinge point for him, or it's going to have to be, whether it's because it's a hinge point because he chooses now to get better, or it's a hinge point because he accepts, no, this is just who I am, and we got to figure something else out. So definitely. Now we have given the Celtics their flowers. We've given the Celtics their props, but and we've talked about how hard it is to win a championship in the NBA, but it is a conversation that is worth having as to looking at their path that got them here, looking at not just who they played in the NBA Finals, but also who did they play to get here to the NBA Finals, and how that may have affected them, and how that contributed to their ability to win it here. Nick and I were talking a couple days ago, and I was just really thinking about, I would be interested in looking back at some of the other NBA Finals losers of the recent time, and to what it would have looked like. Would they have won if they had as easy of a route as the Celtics did? But then, and I'm sure any Celtics fans seeing this are immediately typing this in the comments, the Celtics did play incredible throughout the regular season against full strength teams, against teams all across the association, both conferences, that got them to the point that they deserved the 1 seed, which is an easier go at it. And so I walked myself back a little bit and was like, all right, how about we look at 1 seeds that have made it to the NBA Finals that have lost, and what their path looked like. Now, you'd be surprised at how many times the NBA Finals loser isn't actually a 1 seed when you look back through it. So Nick and I both took some time over the last couple of days, especially here today once it was official. Boston won. Looking back at some other playoffs that ended in a finals loser being a number 1 seed, and to see sort of what their path was like compared to this year's Celtics, and who may have won instead of losing if they had a similar arc here to what the Celtics had. So Nick, why don't you tell me a couple of yours? We'll just sort of go back and forth. You give one, I'll give one. Nick's, I know, are more geared toward the 2000s, and mine are geared a little bit farther back, because I think there's some really, really interesting storylines when you get farther back in the NBA history than just what we've had recently. But Nick, go ahead. Let's go back and forth here. Maybe 3 or 4 total talking about some of these teams.
Sure. There are 2 actually first that I'll just package them together because same team 3 years apart. But the last 2, or the 2 most recent teams that actually were number 1 seeds that lost, both Warriors teams. The 2016 team that was obviously 73-9 and on their way to be the greatest team of all time record-wise before something terrible happened. They obviously were a number 1 seed and lost to the Cavaliers. And I think that if you look at them in the context of this Celtics path, I think they would light the whole East on fire. I think they would annihilate the Cavaliers with or without Donovan Mitchell. I think they would destroy the Heat without Jimmy Butler. I think that these Pacers, with or without Halliburton, are getting blown out of the water probably. And so the path to the finals, I think that 2016 team would easily go through them. I think if you're looking at against Dallas, I think that it's still just an all-time better team against a team that had to be scraping the barrel at the trade deadline. So I definitely think the 16 Warriors and the 19 Warriors, if you're talking about path, if you're talking about a healthy Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson, I think that if you're just looking at the Warriors with all of those players going through this Eastern Conference, that you're probably seeing 4 and 5 game series like the Celtics went through, if you're talking about with the healthy Klay and Kevin Durant. So I feel like the Warriors just have 2 more championships if they're able to either stay healthy or not run into 2016 LeBron.
Yeah. And I think one of the really, really interesting things, and you can sort of go either way of like, would you rather a team that actually is more battle tested when they get there because they've gone through tougher stuff, but at the same time, the more games you play, the harder it is to be able to stay healthy, right? And I think especially about that 2016 Warriors team that came back from a 3-1 deficit in the Western Conference Finals against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the last year when Kevin Durant was there, and how, like, yes, you're like, well, they're more resilient, they're more battle tested maybe, but that's 2 more games against a way better team than what the Celtics played in the Eastern Conference Finals that just took it out of you and wore it out of you. I don't know for sure exactly how long of a break then there was between the end of the Western Conference Finals and the NBA Finals, but considering that their series went 7 games, as opposed to 5 games for the Western Conference Finals, this year and 4 for the Celtics, I'm sure they didn't have, a week and a half long break like the Celtics did before the NBA Finals this year either.
So what about the teams you had in mind? I know you have some historical, there's some great number 1 seeds, especially 80s and 90s that you had in mind that definitely.
Yeah. So
East.
Yeah. So I will also start with a grouping, one here. And that is looking at the 96-97 Utah Jazz and the 97-98 Utah Jazz. This is the John Stockton, Karl Malone Utah Jazz team that went back-to-back NBA Finals coming out of the Western Conference, made it back-to-back both times, playing against the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls. In both years, they lost to the Bulls in the finals, 4-2. And, that's just we could just start right there with that final series. The Utah Jazz in 97-98 and 96-97, if they were playing this year's Dallas Mavericks, I just don't see this year's Dallas Mavericks team beating them. Part of that is just looking at the different eras, and I do think that even though the 3-pointer was not as prominent in that era, I do think that it's the transition from this year's Mavs team to that era and style of play is going to be way more difficult than that era or that team style of play of those Jazz teams to this era. And I mean, John Stockton and Karl Malone, in my opinion, are the best duo in NBA history to not have a championship together. And I don't see Daniel Gafford and Maxi Kleber and Derek Lively shutting down, or being able to stop Karl Malone. I don't see a good enough defender from the guards that's going to be able to keep John Stockton. I mean, John Stockton would score the way he when needed and did a great job of that, but just the way he was able to facilitate. I mean, there's a reason that his assist record is never going to be touched. It feels like, and that's because he was able to, make so many passes. I think there's so many clips, especially from this year's playoffs and the finals of Luka Doncic and some of his assists that are just like mind blowing. Like, how did he know that there was going to be a guy there, right? But at the same time, Luka had a ton of turnovers, and that's one of the things that maybe Stockton wasn't making these super flashy, no look, passing the ball behind his head sort of passes, but he was protecting the ball and taking care of the ball. And so I really think that those two Jazz teams are winning championships if they had the same path, because it wasn't just playing against the Mavs, but also they in 96-97 they played in the Western Conference Finals against a Houston Rockets team that had Hakeem Olajuwon on it, right? And that is the Hakeem Olajuwon, Kenny the Jet Smith Rockets, much tougher team than the Indiana Pacers this year without Tyrese Halliburton. They beat the Lakers 4-1 in the conference semifinals. And yes, that was sort of that in between of like post Magic, pre Kobe, but still a solid Lakers team nonetheless.
97?
Yeah.
97. So that was like rookie Kobe Bryant, I think. But like dealing with Shaq as well as they did with a rookie Kobe who wasn't doing stuff like that. Still very impressive to deal with Shaq that way, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, I'm not. That may have been before Shaq got there too.
Shaq got there Kobe's rookie year, and so I think it was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So like, that's I think that it would be really, really interesting to see those two Utah Jazz teams competing, having the same route as this year's Celtics team.
Definitely. Over the last 20 years, there were very few, I would say, number one seeds who lost the finals. There were the Warriors teams that I spoke about before. And there were only 4 other number one seeds that actually lost. So that totals 6 number one seeds in just about 24 years. So that's one every 4 years about. But what really stood out to me from what I noticed is that the Lakers, the Kobe Shaq Lakers, all 3 of the championships they won in 2000, in 2001, and 2002, those were all number one seed teams. Those Pacers teams, those Nets teams, those 76ers teams that they played were all number one seeds. But what I really also just stood out to me a lot was that 2003 when the Spurs also beat the Nets that year, and in 99 when Tim Duncan beat the Knicks, all 5 of those years in a row, those Eastern Conference teams, man, there are a lot of teams in there that I just don't think were very good finals teams. I think the East post Michael Jordan all the way to like the Pistons in 04, like the 04 Pistons, Ben Wallace, Rasheed. I just feel like that era of 5 years of very early 2000s was a very weak East. And I think all of those number one seeds, although they had talented players in Kidd and Iverson and in Reggie Miller, I think that all of those teams, although they're number one seeds in a weak East, then I don't know that a weak East now makes much of a difference in terms of like, they'd still have to play a really good team in the Mavericks. And so I think that it's a very tough comparison for me for all 3 of those number one seeds.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's a case to be made somewhat for the 2000 Pacers and the 2001 Sixers. Definitely with the 2000 Pacers, Nick, you did some deep dive there. And I mean, Reggie Miller was still on that team and he was balling out. Mark Jackson was an established player at that point. Jalen Rose in his 5th year in the league was balling in those finals. Nick, you said you mentioned that he averaged 23 points on 45, 50, and 83 splits. I mean, that is some great basketball right there.
And that's even better than the regular season stats that year. He won most improved player that year and obviously had grown a lot as a player. But to put up those numbers in the finals against a Kobe Shaq Lakers team is unbelievable basketball in the biggest of spots.
Yeah. I think that the 2001 76ers would be really interesting, just thinking about their not just their path there, but playing in those finals. So for one, that was a team that did steal a game in Los Angeles against the Kobe Shaq Lakers. And so if you are able to do that, then it's just at least worth thinking about, the roster construction of that team, because it wasn't just Kobe and Shaq, it was Derek Fisher. There were other guys too that were, certainly contributing. And I don't think roster wise, that roster is, like this year's Mavericks roster is anywhere close to that year's roster. But you also look at their way that they got there. They played the Vince Carter and T-Mac Raptors in the conference semifinals and went 7 games. That is a lot tougher of a team to play against than the Cavaliers without Jarrett Allen and also not having Donovan Mitchell for 2 games in that series. Then in the conference finals, they played against the Ray Allen Bucks and went 7 games against them. It's a lot easier than playing against the Pacers without Tyrese Halliburton. a lot harder than playing with that against this year's Pacers without Tyrese Halliburton. So I mean, they were beat up. Allen Iverson was carrying most of the load, and it's I have a feeling, not just have a feeling, but also in doing the research and watching clips and stuff that I can, that it was very similar to sort of Jimmy Butler's finals last year against the Nuggets after he scraped and clawed the Heat all the way there too. So I think that would be an interesting, thing. I don't know, maybe ask AI to like figure it out. I don't know, but to see that, one of the other ones that I thought was really, really interesting is going all the way back to here we are. This isn't even the one that I was looking for. There are a lot of Lakers Celtics series that happened in the 1980s that they were both one seeds going into it, and not just the two of them were Lakers. One of them that I saw was Celtics, and I think with all three of them, you could make a very, very strong case that if they had the same path as the Celtics this year, that all of them are winning those respective series instead, just because, I mean, those teams were just so loaded with talent. But one that I found that was really, really interesting to me was the 1988-89 season and the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the Los Angeles Lakers that year were just such a dominant team. When they got to the finals against the Detroit Pistons, this is the Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, bad boy Pistons, they got swept in that final series. They lost 4-0. But the Lakers that got there, they went 3-0 against the Portland Trailblazers in the first round. Again, they were a 1 seed. Portland was the 8 seed. It's like, okay, that's, sort of expected, especially back then when the first round was a 5-game series, not a 7. It's even less likely that, the 8 seed is going to win a random game, that would be like, oh man, that's cool, good for them. But then the next round, they went 4-0 against the Supersonics. That's, the Gary Payton Supersonics. Good, solid teams there, just swept them. Then in the finals, they swept the Phoenix Suns. They swept the Phoenix Suns, went 4-0 there also. And so, they had won 11 straight games when they got to the NBA Finals, and they faced the mammoth, the beast that was those bad boy Pistons of the 80s with Isaiah Thomas and young Dennis Rodman before he went to the Bulls. And like, man, this Los Angeles Lakers team was not a slouch of a team, right? And it's hard to sort of look at the path like we were talking about, because if you look at the games that they won, then it must have been with not much resistance for them, but still, then you get there and you get swept by the Pistons. That is rough. And I think it would be really, really interesting looking at that. Like, does Magic win another ring with the Lakers there in 88-89, depending on how that looks.
Right. And to be fair, that is Kareem's last year. He retired right after that season. So it's Kareem on his last legs. And those Lakers did make another finals against MJ, obviously, in the 90s. So it was still a very talented team. But still, it's not like we're talking about the early 80s Lakers with far closer to his peak Kareem and still incredibly good Magic. And so it's not quite the same level of team that we saw from those 80s dynasty Lakers Celtics, but it's still obviously a very, very quality team that I think would still stomp the East if we're talking about this year's East, 100%.
Absolutely. All right, Nick, do you have one more? Because I do have one more, but I want to let you get yours in if you do.
No, I'll just let you go for it. I think the other one that I saw was the 08 Lakers, and I think that team, barring like regular season injuries, like they won the next 2 championships after that. So I think that they're another level above any of the teams that these Celtics played. So I think, to me, that's just a straightforward one of Lakers should be pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that year they looked so good, and that year that was the year that the Celtics finally did it. They had finally acquired all the pieces. and put it together to do it. And, no, that's not taking anything away from them. They did what they had to do. It is interesting, you then sort of look, and it's been, we talked about 16 years since they last won one. So, at what cost, right? Now they recouped a lot then once they broke up that team, traded Pierce and Garnett to the Nets for every single pick that the Nets had, basically. And then the Nets continued to not be that great of a team. So they ended up being picks that paid off, but yeah, I think that one's pretty chalk that Lakers team, if they had the same path as this year's Celtics, there's no doubt that
Right.
Kobe is then having 6. Kobe then has 6. And then there's more of a conversation than people are willing to have between him and MJ.
Right.
The last one that I wanted to mention was the 94-95 Orlando Magic. Now, this is Shaq when he was still with the Magic. They were the 1 seed in the East that year. This is the year that Michael Jordan came back in the middle of the season.
Mm-hmm.
But in the first round, they beat the Celtics 3-1. In the second round, they play the Bulls and they beat them 4-2. So they do beat them. Michael Jordan was still coming back, but he also, when he came back, was probably still a top 5 player in the league once he, set foot back on the basketball court and hung up his baseball cleats, right? So, and, Pippen and Rodman are there, right? So, it's not like this is a Bulls team that it's like, oh, well, that old decrepit Michael Jordan, right? They beat them 4-2. Then they play the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, and this was a great Pacers team coached by Larry Bird at that point, has Reggie Miller, has a lot of the same pieces. Mark Jackson is still there as that not everybody is still there, but that 99-2000 team that we had talked about a little earlier. They beat them in 7 games. Then in the finals, they play against Hakeem Olajuwon and Kenny the Jet Smith, and they lose 4-0. They get swept in the finals. The Houston Rockets were a 6 seed that year. So also kind of similar to this year with the Mavs and, removing them and putting them in that era. They were a 6 seed, so they were an underachieving team throughout the regular season. That Rockets team beat in the first round the 3 seed Utah Jazz, and that was Karl Malone and John Stockton. Then beat the Suns. That was Charles Barkley's Suns, 4-3. Then beat the San Antonio Spurs 4-2 and got to the finals and swept the Magic. And man, that Magic team was a very, very good team, and it was almost shocking the way that they lost that NBA Finals. But I mean, I'm looking at the Celtics run this year compared to theirs. And, a team even in that era that is comparable to the Dallas Mavericks. The reason that the Rockets got here is because of Hakeem Olajuwon. And the reason that they won was because Hakeem was able to match up against Shaq. And a team of, the mid-90s equivalents of this year's Mavs does not have a center that is keeping Shaq from being Shaq.
Definitely.
And so I see no reason to believe that the Orlando Magic don't win it this year. And then if we want to get really, really crazy when it comes to historical significance, if they win a championship with Shaq, they then probably are in a much different place and are like, why in the world would we trade him? Why would we trade him to the Lakers? Because it worked. That was why they traded him. They're like, listen, this didn't work. He has a lot of trade value. This is the last year of his contract. He's unhappy. He's leaving anyway, probably. Let's get what we can for him, right? So I think that the Orlando Magic win a championship in 94-95 with Shaquille O'Neal, and then that changes a lot of basketball history.
Definitely. And I think that we kind of underrate those Magic too, because they beat the Bulls that year. But the thing is, Michael Jordan, although coming back from baseball late that season, he still scored over 30 points, I believe, in that series and was efficient. Like, he was full-on Michael Jordan. He just lost, and people tend to ignore that he was a tremendous player in that series. And so a Magic team that beat Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, like, it was those guys in their prime, and they were beat by the Magic. That must have been a great Magic team that Hakeem was just the perfect matchup against Shaq. But what other teams have Hakeem? Not many.
Right. And I think the reason that them beating the Bulls that year in the playoffs is so downplayed is because of, and granted, we have a lot of bias being as young as we are and not being alive when the, MJ Bulls were as dominant as they are. And I know that I still believe that Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player of all time, and he is my GOAT. So I'm not, but I think the reason that gets downplayed a lot is because of the MJ went 6-0 in the finals. And it's like, okay, well, there were other years that he didn't make the finals. And it's like, well, but he was 6-0 in the finals. And so his runs that didn't end with him being in the finals get talked about less. And so I think that, them losing in the second round, not even making the Eastern Conference Finals, gets a little, forgotten because, like you said, Pippen and Rodman did not take time off, to go try other sports, and we're still on the team and playing at that point, So that was a great Bulls team, and you're spot on. So yeah. Well, y'all, like we said, and I want to repeat, congratulations to the 2023-2024 Boston Celtics as being NBA champions. They completely deserve it. By far the best team all year. Yes, they had a little easier of a run than some, but you know what? When you play great all year, I think they went 17-5 against the Western Conference this year. Like something ridiculous, outside of the finals. That it's like, it's not like, oh well, the East was bad, because it was like, well, they, destroyed the West too. But yeah, the greatness of the Celtics. Congratulations, to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I saw someone told me or said to me, they said, was Jason Tatum just going back through all of the memorable finals championship quotes and just finding ways to use all of them last night?
Just trying to sneak them in there.
Yeah. But hey, you know what? He's gotten a lot of scrutiny, and what he said, what can they say now? It gets harder and harder when you win one. So yeah. So obviously, congratulations to the Celtics. Nick and I are so excited that we're bringing this back, man. It's been tough these last couple of years. We just sort of started this at a time that life was just not as hard and fast for us in terms of what our schedules looked like and everything. And now that we're in a place that it's like, you know what? No, we can do this again. We're really excited that we're back. So stay tuned for weekly episodes, which is our plan. Talking NBA, talking NFL, college football, college basketball, and anything else that happens that's worth talking about. We're excited to be here and to be doing this. So thank you all so much for watching and for tuning in. Nick, it's been a pleasure as always.